You think May left it to you because she loved you? That's what Jenna said. Lipstick perfect, voice syrup sweet, while handing me the lawsuit. Not a word about the nights I stayed. Not a whisper about the bruises May tried to hide with long sleeves and lavender. They called it unexpected. But I was there. Through the hospice visits, through the empty holidays. And now? They wanted to erase all of it. With one envelope. If you've ever been quietly loyal, only to be loudly blamed, drop a 1 in the comments. If not, you're lucky, drop a 0. Because sometimes the most painful betrayals don't shout. They arrive by mail. They didn't even call, just an envelope tucked between a grocery coupon and an overdue water bill delivered on my birthday. The air in my apartment smells faintly of last week's cinnamon tea and the remnants of thawed stew, one of the care packages Mom sent each fall. I stood barefoot on the cold linoleum, the corners of the envelope pressing into my palm, as if reminding me to read it again. The label read, Certified Mail, printed in an impersonal block font. No return address, no signature, just the envelope and my name. I stared at the table where I'd laid out a modest birthday breakfast for myself. Half a bagel, a clementine, and a cup of now lukewarm cinnamon tea. That tea tasted sharper now, like it carried the aftertaste of something I couldn't quite name. I set the envelope next to my mug and sat down slowly, as though sitting might soften what I already suspected. I opened it. The language was sterile, legal, precise. Words like redistribution, executor, and reallocation jumped out at me. But the meaning came in one clean cut. Everything would go to Jenna. The house, the car, the savings, every stitch of family legacy now folded neatly into my sister's life. No note, no explanation. For years, I told myself their silence was forgetfulness. But deep down, I always knew it was something sharper. My birthday always seemed to arrive with a tinge of frost. I remember being 12. Mom had promised we'd go to the county fair, just the three of us. But then Jenna had a piano recital, and I was told I had too much homework anyway. I stayed home. That day, I sat on the porch waiting until dusk fell. Even the porch light stayed off. Mom always said, "We love both our girls." But her eyes sparkled only when Jenna walked in. I rose from the table and walked to the window. Outside, Pittsburgh's November chill painted the sky in dull streaks of gray. Flakes of snow started drifting down, lazy and unsure. I pressed my hands to the radiator below the window, letting the faint warmth soothe the ache curling in my chest. Across the room, a photo frame sat face down. It used to hold a picture of all three of us from Jenna's graduation. I'd taken it down a few months back, after the last phone call that ended in silence. Now it just collected dust, a rectangular ghost of something I no longer believed in. The envelope rested on the kitchen table, edges curling slightly under the weight of damp air. I placed it gently next to the rice cooker I hadn't bothered to plug in. Everything felt half-finished, like I'd paused in the middle of my own life and couldn't quite find the thread again. I stayed by the window longer than I meant to. The snow had thickened, now layering the fire escape like powdered sugar. The street below was quiet, just the flicker of a porch light across the alley and the soft hum of a neighbor's radio playing Sinatra. A line from In the Wee Small Hours floated up through the cold. Something about regrets and silence. I almost laughed. Almost. The radiator clicked, struggling to keep up with the growing chill. I sat back down at the table and picked up the envelope again, running my fingers along the crease. I didn't need to reread it. Every word had already imprinted itself, each clause a paper cut. I found myself wishing it had come with some sort of message, a scribble in Mom's handwriting, even a post-it note with, "Hope you understand." Anything to prove that someone, anyone, had thought of me when sealing that damn envelope. But there was nothing, just the sterile formality of being erased. My fingers curled tightly around the tea mug. I took a sip and winced. It had gone cold, bitter. I got up and poured what remained down the sink, the splash sounding louder than it should have in the quiet apartment. I walked down the hall, passing framed prints and a small ceramic dish I'd once brought back from a student trip to New Mexico. At the end of the hallway was the linen closet, where I kept a shoebox of old photos. On impulse, I pulled it down, brushing away a thin layer of dust. Inside were birthday cards from when I was young, mostly from Aunt May, her handwriting loopy and joyful, always in purple ink. "To my favorite girl," she'd written once, "don't let the world tell you who you are." She was the only one who saw me as someone separate from Jenna, not just the second daughter. I sat on the carpet with that box beside me, the photos splayed like confessions. There we were, me in oversized glasses and a sunflower dress, Jenna beaming beside a 3-tiered birthday cake. Mom holding both of us, but looking, always, just a bit more toward Jenna. It wasn't cruel, just practiced. I picked up one of the pictures and brought it to the living room. The light from the window had dimmed. I set the photo next to the empty frame, thinking briefly about slipping it inside. But I didn't. It felt dishonest. Instead, I turned the frame around, let it stay empty. In the kitchen, the rice cooker's plug dangled like a forgotten intention. I hovered over it, unsure whether to start dinner or just call it a day. My birthday had ended not with cake or candles, but with a document stripping me of a legacy I didn't know I still hoped for. Maybe that's what hurt the most, realizing I'd still been waiting. I didn't wonder why they sent it. I wondered why they waited until my birthday. Aunt May never liked spectacle. She left her house to me the same way she gave me everything else, quietly. I sat cross-legged on my living room floor, surrounded by a half-opened box of old letters and faded photographs, the kind that curled at the edges like aging leaves. Aunt May's handwriting danced across cream-colored envelopes, always in blue ink, always with my full name spelled carefully. Nora Elise Morton. The scent of lavender still clung faintly to some of them, stubborn even after all these years. The wind howled outside my apartment window, but in my mind I was back at her house in the suburbs. The pale green wooden shingles, the chimes that sang differently with every season, the smell of pine and lavender that greeted you like an old friend. She never said welcome, not because she wasn't warm, but because the house said it for her. I pulled out the letter she left me. Not the legal documents. The ones from the lawyer's office were precise, emotionless. This one was folded inside a crocheted pouch, tucked beneath her favorite teacup. "You saw me," it read in her slanted, patient cursive. "You didn't stay because you had to. You stayed because you listened." Mark used to joke that I was the only one she ever let near her old porcelain teapot, the one with a tiny chip on the handle that she called a birthmark. "That pot's got more history than the White House," he once said, and I knew he meant it with affection. He'd help her fix the TV sometimes, though I'm not sure he ever stayed long enough to notice the way she arranged her books by sentiment rather than subject. Jenna never got it. She came once, posed for selfies in the living room, complained that the floorboards creaked too much, and left before the soup even simmered. She later told me, almost apologetically, "That place smells like dust and dead plants." She didn't know about the lavender. Aunt May kept a sachet under every sill, believing it kept both bugs and bad memories away. Tonight, I wrapped one of Aunt May's old knitted scarves around my shoulders. The yarn was slightly scratchy, a muted plum color, soft in the way things become after years of use. I could almost hear her say, "It's not the softness, Nora, it's the warmth." Jenna once asked me, not unkindly, "So, you're really keeping the house?" She asked it like someone would ask about keeping an old coat, worn, out of fashion, but functional. She didn't know the house wasn't just wood and windows. It was stories. It was Sundays spent shelling peas on the porch, her humming low songs neither of us had names for. It was silence filled with meaning. The documents were all in order. Aunt May had made sure of that. The house, the modest savings account, even the chest of letters, all legally mine. But more than that, they were given to me with intent. She didn't need a ceremony. Her love never arrived in bright packages or holiday cards. It came in the form of taut stitches, shared quiet, and a space I could always return to. When I touched the doorknob of her house last week, cold, brass, unpolished, I didn't just feel the chill of November. I felt her fingers too. She had polished it every Saturday morning, not because it needed it, but because she believed in honoring the things that held us. I placed the teacup back on its shelf and folded the letter again, sliding it between two others in the box beside me. Some people inherit diamonds or deeds. I inherited being seen. And in a family that often looked through me, Aunt May's gaze felt like the only one that ever landed. Jenna once asked me, not unkindly, "So, you're really keeping the house?" That night, I dreamt of her kitchen, small, square, and always warm from the oven. Even in summer, the house carried a slow kind of heat, the kind that seeped into your bones and stayed there. I saw myself, 11 or 12, sitting at the table while she showed me how to slice apples thin enough for pie. "Not too much sugar," she'd warn. "Let the fruit speak for itself." I hadn't remembered that detail in years. The kitchen window had lace curtains that only Aunt May could keep white, no matter how many pies we baked or how many rainy days passed through. And on the windowsill, lavender, always lavender, sometimes dried, sometimes fresh from the garden. She once said it kept her company. I think it kept her steady. I rose from the floor, scarf still draped around my neck, and made a cup of tea with the last of the Earl Grey she gave me 2 winters ago. The box was nearly empty now, and I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. I held the tin in my hands, fingers tracing the faded label, thinking how things left behind always whisper more than things shouted in the moment. I walked to my own windowsill and set the tea down. No lavender here, just the faint scent of city grit and the view of an alley. But at that moment, I could almost pretend. She gave me her house because she knew I'd listen to what the walls remembered. And I would. They came dressed like a holiday card, but what they wanted wasn't warm or cheerful. The doorbell rang right as I set the mug of cocoa on the coffee table. I hadn't been expecting anyone, especially not them. Outside, the December sun had already slipped low behind the neighboring brick buildings, casting long golden stripes through my blinds. When I opened the door, it felt like a greeting card came to life. Jenna in a rich burgundy coat with matching lipstick. Carol in a faux fur shawl she only wore when she wanted to look elegantly maternal. And Jared holding a pie box like it was a peace offering. "Surprise!" Jenna chirped. I stepped aside without a word. They filed in, taking their usual positions. Mom on the armchair, Jenna next to the window, Jared awkwardly near the tree I'd put up that weekend. It was artificial and modest, but I'd added the little velvet cardinal ornament Aunt May gave me 10 years ago. "This place is so cozy," Carol said, voice syrupy. "It's quaint," Jenna added, eyeing my bookshelf like it held secrets. Jared handed me the pie. "Apple, from that place on 5th. Thought it might be nice." The price tag was still on the box. I took it and set it down beside the cocoa, which was already cooling in the mugs I had prepared for myself. They hadn't called, hadn't warned, just arrived, bundled and beaming like it was all perfectly natural. "We're just so proud of you," Mom said, her smile unwavering. "All that work you do with that nonprofit, changing lives." I raised an eyebrow. She hadn't asked what it was called or what we did. Jenna cleared her throat, folded her manicured hands in her lap. "Actually, we had something we wanted to talk to you about." There it was. She launched into it. Some eco-friendly startup she and Jared had been dreaming about. Sustainable packaging or biodegradable cleaning pods? I wasn't sure. She used words like seed capital, momentum, and pilot investment. Jared nodded along, chiming in only to confirm some numbers. They painted a picture of earnest ambition. Then the ask came. "We just need a co-signer," Jenna said, eyes wide with practiced vulnerability. "Someone with stability, just to help us get approved." I stood and walked to the kitchen. I could feel their eyes on my back as I poured water into a kettle, waiting for the hum. I didn't answer. Instead, I brought over 3 mugs and placed them, one by one, in front of each person. Cocoa, untouched and steaming. I didn't sit down. The room felt thick. Jenna's hands fidgeted in her lap, fingers twisting, then smoothing the sleeve of her cream sweater. A faint purple stain peeked out from one cuff. Ink, maybe. Or old wine. It reminded me of something. Years ago, she'd spilled milk all over me before school and blamed the cat. I cried. She didn't. Some things don't change. Have you ever been asked to help by the same people who once made you feel invisible? If you've ever been used under the name of family, drop a comment number 3 below. Now let's keep going. "Of course," Carol said, her tone light. "Family helps each other." I met her gaze. Didn't blink. Didn't smile. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was intentional. Jared shifted in his seat. Jenna looked down. The radiator hissed softly behind me. Outside, wind rattled a loose windowpane. "Anyway," Jenna said, voice brittle, "we thought we'd stop by and share the idea. Didn't want you to feel left out." She smiled like it was a gift. I nodded slowly, as if accepting it, then bent to adjust the pie box, as though it needed straightening. The visit didn't last long after that. They stood, hugged me too tightly, left the pie and their empty mugs, promised to be in touch. I didn't walk them out. When the door clicked shut, I leaned against it for a moment. The cocoa had gone cold. My hand curled around the mug, but I didn't lift it. Jenna once said, "That place smells like dust and dead plants." She didn't know Aunt May kept lavender under every windowsill. I looked at my bookshelf. A thin layer of dust had settled on the top shelf. Next to it, the old teapot, May's teapot, gleamed faintly in the low light. They thought kindness was currency, that showing up with pie and perfume could buy back history. That night, I wrapped myself in a knitted throw and watched the lights on the tree blink without rhythm. I thought of the velvet cardinal. I thought of lavender and spilled milk. And of course, I thought of the stain on Jenna's sleeve. 3 weeks later, I got a new envelope. This time, it wasn't a letter. It was a lawsuit. They didn't just rewrite the will. They tried to rewrite me. The envelope was thick this time, heavier than a birthday card, colder than a utility bill. I found it wedged beneath the morning paper, the kind of placement that tried too hard to be casual. I didn't open it right away. The snow had started falling again, silent against the glass, and for a second I just stood there, watching the flakes layer over the porch railing, erasing edges of the world I thought I knew. Eventually, I peeled it open. The return address wasn't theirs. It was their attorney's. Inside was a lawsuit, crisp in tone and precise in cruelty. Undue influence, it said. They accused me of manipulating Aunt May into altering her will, of exploiting an old woman's fading mind for personal gain. I read every page twice, each sentence chipped away at something inside me, until what remained felt hollow. There was an email printout with May's supposed signature. Except she never used email. A revised will dated weeks after she'd slipped into her final coma. Even a photograph of the living room bookshelf with only one photo frame, one that now held a landscape, not the photo of us from my college graduation. See? The footnote read, no evidence of familial closeness. I didn't cry. Not then. Not even when I found the final page. A demand for the immediate return of the house, the account, and the personal items left behind. They wanted it all. They wanted me erased. I called Erin. She picked up after 2 rings, her voice low and calm, the way it had been when she defended campus protesters a decade ago. I figured this might happen, she said. Do you still have the hospice logs? I did. Along with the notarized will, May's medical records, and a folder of handwritten notes she'd left over the years. I'd kept them not out of paranoia, but love. Mementos of a woman who trusted me when no one else did. I sat at the kitchen table, documents spread out like a battlefield map. The light slanted across the tile, and for a moment, I watched it illuminate the edge of a sticky note tucked in May's handwriting. Remind Nora to replace the furnace filter. She notices things. I hadn't seen it before. It had fallen between the pages of a manual I never read. I handed it to Erin when she arrived. She took it, read it, and smiled. Barely. Details like this matter more than people think. We examined the revised will together. Erin pointed to the date. This is 6 days after May was fully sedated, she noted. They didn't even bother checking her hospice status. She jotted notes in a small leather-bound pad, lips pursed. We've seen this before. Fabricated contests, sudden new wills, conveniently timed emails from the dead. But this one, it's particularly arrogant. Outside, the snow thickened. Inside, Erin clicked her pen shut. I'll file a preliminary response, she said, and request a discovery motion. If they're going to claim fraud, they'd better prepare to have their emails and timelines dissected. I nodded, though my throat ached with unshed words. I wanted to scream, to ask how they could do this, but I'd grown up learning that silence was sometimes the louder protest. Erin looked at me, brow furrowed. You okay? I shook my head. But I will be. Have you ever stayed quiet until life forced you to raise your voice? If you've ever chosen strength after silence, comment number 4 below. Now, let's see what happens next. Later that night, I poured tea into the chipped mug May used to prefer. I lit the lavender candle she'd once gifted me for mental clarity and placed the sticky note beside it. I needed reminders that some truths were too quiet for courtrooms, but louder in the heart. As I sifted through the last of May's files, I came across an envelope she had labeled "Just in Case." Inside was a faded recipe card with her handwriting in violet ink, her lavender shortbread cookies. On the back, scribbled faintly, was a note. If Nora finds this, she deserves something sweet. The corners curled like pages long forgotten, but the words wrapped around me like one of her hand-knit shawls. I remembered how May used to let me stir the dough, even when I spilled half the flour. She'd wink and say, "Mistakes mean you're trying." That memory settled in my chest, with a warmth that didn't match the frigid morning outside. Back in the kitchen, Erin was reviewing the notary's seal on the original documents. "Even if this goes to trial," she said, "we have truth." That still counts for something. She didn't say it like a slogan, just a fact she believed in. And somehow, that steadied me. I took the recipe card and placed it beside the legal brief. Both were, in their own way, testaments to the life I had with May, a life my family now tried to deny existed. When Erin left, she paused at the door. "You don't owe them forgiveness," she said gently. "Just the truth." I locked the door behind her, then returned to the kitchen. The snow was still falling, undisturbed by everything unraveling beneath it. And yet, at that moment, I didn't feel erased. I felt ready. "This isn't just false," Erin said, eyes narrowed. "It's malicious, and we're going to prove it." It wasn't the lies that cut deepest. It was the people who stayed quiet. Erin's office always smelled like burnt coffee and toner. A low hum from the copy machine filled the room, rising and falling like a mechanical breath. Outside, the December sky faded into a bruised gray, and the bare branches tapped lightly against the window, reminding me of how empty things could be, even when they made noise. I held the printed deposition summary in my lap, the pages trembling slightly, though my hands were still. My eyes skimmed over familiar names: Carol, Jenna, Jared, all marked with dates and footnotes and exhibits. Legal words, sharp and sterile, that somehow stung more than shouted insults ever could. On Erin's desk, a stack of trial prep folders leaned against a ceramic mug that read, "Nevertheless, she litigated." She tapped her pen, steady, focused, while I tried to find something solid in the growing fog in my chest. "They filed the motion to compel," she said without looking up. "We'll push back with the hospice logs and handwriting analysis." I nodded, not because I understood all the strategy, but because silence seemed like the only currency I had left that still held value. Later that evening, I was back in my apartment, the lamps casting their usual warm glow. I pulled down an old photo album from the bookshelf, the navy cover frayed at the corners, just like the edges of memory tend to be. Sitting on the floor, I flipped through page after page: birthdays, cookouts, blurry Polaroids of Christmas mornings long gone. 10 group photos. In 8 of them, I stood at the edge. Half visible, cropped by design or indifference. My phone buzzed. Mark. I hesitated. He hadn't called in years, not since Dime's funeral. "Hey." His voice was soft, uncertain. "Got a minute?" I didn't say yes, but I didn't hang up either. "I saw what Jenna posted," he continued. "The graduation picture. She cut you out." I closed the album slowly, heart tightening. "Not the first time," I said. "She's always had a way with edits." Mark sighed. "Look, I didn't know how bad it was. I stayed out of it because—" "You didn't want to get in the middle," I finished for him. The phrase had become a family motto, more sacred than grace at dinner. There was a pause. "I found the original photo," he said finally. "You're right in the center. Dee May was smiling at you." He sent it to me, and I stared at my younger self, gown crooked, but standing tall, arms looped awkwardly around my cousin's shoulders. Not perfect, but real. "I should have spoken up," he murmured. "I knew what they were doing, but—" "You didn't know how to stop it," I said. He hesitated. Yeah. I held the phone tight, then released it slowly. You did, Mark. You just didn't want to lose your seat at the table. There was nothing after that. No defense, no denial, just the low hum of the call ending and the higher hum of my radiator kicking in. Later, I stood in the dressing room of a discount department store, the mirror unkind under the fluorescence. I was trying on a black blazer for the hearing, structured, plain, functional armor. As I adjusted the lapel, I remembered a shopping trip long ago, watching Jenna spin in a white dress while Mom beamed. I'd reached for a sweater, only to be told, "Hand-me-downs build character, Nora. New things are for special occasions." Apparently, being me never qualified. I ran my fingers along the seam of the blazer, pausing at the pocket that was stitched shut. I thought of how Mom used to say, "Real ladies don't need to carry things. Someone will do it for them." But no one carried anything for me. Not the books, not the grief, and certainly not the burden of being left behind. As I left the store, bundled in a coat with a tear along the inner lining, I walked past families laughing over peppermint lattes, couples holding bags of gifts. The cold nipped at my face, but I didn't pull up my scarf. I needed to feel something real. At home, after Aaron signed off, I printed every photo Mark had sent. I laid them out on the dining table, proof not for the court, but for myself, that I had been there, that I mattered. One photo caught the light differently. It was from Dee May's garden, her hands in the soil, my own tiny fingers beside hers. She'd written on the back, "She plants with care." Aaron had said the truth mattered. And maybe, in the end, that truth didn't just belong in court filings. Maybe it belonged in memory, too. I turned off the lights, leaving only one lamp on, the one beside the armchair where May used to knit. I sat in its shadow, hands folded over the blazer in my lap, waiting for the morning. Tomorrow I will face them all, in court, not as their daughter, not as their sister, but as the villain they invented. In their story, I was a greedy niece. In mine, I was simply there, and that was enough. The courtroom smelled of old wood and anticipation. I sat between Aaron and a thin stack of truth. Folders, exhibits, the fragile edge of memory held together with staples. Jenna sat across from me, in her tailored coat and sculpted hair, her expression sculpted to match. Carol was beside her, her hands clasped in a way I remembered from church pews and silent dinners. Jared stared at his phone until the judge entered. It wasn't a big courtroom. No jury, no dramatic objections, just the low murmur of legalese and the occasional cough from the clerk. But it felt enormous, like every breath I took might echo through years of being overlooked. Aaron rose with practiced calm. "Your Honor, we present Exhibit B, original handwriting samples from the late May Evelyn Harper, notarized and dated prior to the alleged revision." The judge, a woman with soft eyes and a firmer jawline, accepted the folder with a nod. "Proceed?" Jenna's lawyer had tried to paint me as manipulative, opportunistic. They referenced my frequent visits, my control of hospice arrangements, my receipt of May's estate. "She was isolated," the lawyer argued, "and my clients had no chance to intervene." Aaron countered with timelines, hospice records, notes from May's own hand. She presented the will's signing date, 6 days after May had already entered a nonverbal state. The judge looked up. "This date here, November 19th. Medical documentation says she was no longer responsive as of the 13th. Is that correct?" Aaron nodded. "Correct. Signed by hospice nurse Darlene Shaw." I didn't need to look at Jenna to know her mouth was set in that same stiff smile. Carol shifted in her seat, but didn't speak. Jared still silent. Then Aaron held up the letter. The real one. Handwritten. Ink faded slightly, but the loops of May's cursive were as familiar as a lullaby. She saw me, I whispered. Not to the court, not even to Aaron, just to myself. The judge paused after reviewing everything. The evidence submitted shows a clear discrepancy in the dates and authenticity of the alleged revised will. This court finds no grounds to support the claim of undue influence. Case dismissed. And let the record show. The truth stood. I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just nodded. Erin placed her hand over mine for a second, warm and firm. Back home, I lit a candle in the kitchen. The flame flickered against the window, where snow pressed softly against the glass. My coat still smelled faintly of printer toner and cold air. On the kitchen table, the empty frame waited. I'd placed it there days ago, undecided. I took out the graduation photo, the real one, not the cropped version Jenna had once posted. I slipped it into the frame, then took it back out again. Somehow, it felt more honest without it. I walked to the bookshelf and set the frame upright. No photo, no pretense, just space. Room for what was and what never fully would be. My laptop pinged. An old friend from grad school had written, "Heard what happened. If you ever want to talk." I stared at the screen for a long minute, then closed it gently. Not from anger. Just because I no longer needed to be explained. I brewed lavender tea, May's kind. Let it steep until the steam curled up like a memory you don't chase. Just notice. Then I sat in the armchair, opened my notebook, and wrote one final line. I was there. They just didn't want to see me. I didn't write anything else. Before bed, I unfolded an old quilt from the cedar chest, one May had sewn from scraps of fabric I once dismissed as too dull. She'd called it her second chance blanket. The pieces didn't match, but together, they kept warmth just the same. I wrapped it around my shoulders and stood at the window, watching snow layer over the fire escape. Each flake landed without fuss, without asking to be seen. Somewhere in the building, someone laughed. A deep, familiar sound. I imagined their dinner table, full of overlapping voices, napkins passed, stories shared. I didn't envy them. Not anymore. I just missed the idea of it all. The lavender stepped stronger than I meant. I didn't mind. It clung to the air, gentle and unbothered. The kind of scent that didn't insist on being remembered, but stayed anyway. I turned off the lamp, let the room settle around me. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't rehearse what I should have said. I didn't relive what they should have done. I just sat. Still, present, unerased. I didn't hang the photo, I hung the frame, empty but honest. Even after the court ruling, the apartment still smelled faintly of lavender and old paper. The silence they left behind wasn't empty. It echoed with everything they chose not to say. I've come to believe that sometimes acceptance is quieter than forgiveness. It doesn't shout or seek an audience. It just lets you breathe again. If my story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes sharing is the first step toward healing. If my story resonated with something in your life, feel free to follow the channel for more stories that speak to the quiet corners of family and memory. Thank you for listening. I hope to see you in the next story.